Greetings fencers, so I made a short video early on in the series about the concept of Indes, but I wanted to make an updated one that goes a bit more in depth along with more primary source examples, and go through some of the changes to Indes over time. But first, we see in most Zettel sources the 5 words of Liechtenauer mention: Vor, Nach, Schwach, Stärk, Indes. Vor and Nach are explained in episode 7, translate to before and after. My preferred concept interpretation is action and reaction. If you're in the before, you are acting, and if you're in the after, you are reacting. And when you come before with a hue or otherwise, then he must parry you, so an action and a reaction. When he comes before with a hue, then you must parry him. If he acts, we have to react. And stark und schwach means strong and weak, defined in the gloss as the parts of the sword. Understand the weak and strong thus: the hilt to the middle is the strong, the middle to the point is the weak. Now often we end up seeing these 2 words get used a little more, firstly because they are regular words, but we sometimes interpret them as interchangeable in some lines with hart und weich, hard and soft. Hard and soft refer to the pressure on the sword. When one sword clashes on the other, very precisely mark if he is soft or hard in the bind. Here we see weak and strong used in a different manuscript in the same context. When you find yourself on another's sword, feel well if he is weak or strong at the sword. Throughout the plays, the word strong is now open to more interpretation and may not just mean the place on the sword, and you could be referring to hard in the bind, but it also could just be the strong half of the sword. If he parries and remains strong with the parrying on the sword, then remain also strong against with your sword on his. And we also see these words just clumped together. If then the fencer notes and feels that the opponent is strong, hard, and firm on the sword, and the fencer only means to force out his sword, so shall the fencer be weak and soft against. It's not hard to see that these 2 concepts and word pairs could get clumped together and occasionally interchanged. Because the strong controls your opponent's sword, then it will usually feel hard in the bind, and vice versa. The weak of the blade will usually feel soft. So although they are not the same thing, they will sometimes end up coinciding. So now finally we get to Indes. Indes has many attempted translations: instantly, instantaneous, meanwhile, in the moment, inside, within, just as, simultaneous. But Indes is more of a concept and does not get summarized by any of these words. Therefore, it is the one Liechtenauer word that I actually do not translate. I think it deserves to just be Indes. Indes. That is a sharp word. Any swordmaster who doesn't know its name will be cut. It is the key to the art. So what is Indes? Well, it's actually pretty simple. It is stated as feeling. That the feeling and the word Indes are one thing, and one may not be without the other. So then what is fühlen, feeling? When you bind on his sword, then you must feel with the hand if he is but soft or hard on the sword. And when you have felt, then you must work Indes after the soft and after the hard on the sword. So first we feel, then we work Indes. And here we see the word nach, or after. And remember, that means reacting, working after something. So the definition of Indes in the fewest words is reacting to feeling. Or, in a few more words, it's Indes is the reaction to feeling if they are hard or soft on the blade. We can clearly see in our sparring or training when we choose wrong. For example, if someone is hard in the bind after a cut and we shoot the point, then it just deviates off to the side. Instead, a proper Indes reaction would be winding, pulling, changing through. And if someone is soft in the bind, then cutting around or changing through would not be smart. Instead, a correct reaction would be shooting, reversing, or direct cut. So understanding feeling and Indes are important in designing triggers and options in your drilling and sparring. But we're also given a list and told that Indes doubles, mutates, changes through, runs through, takes the slice, wrestles with, and takes the sword. Now if you've ever wrestled before, then you'll know that feeling is a huge and constant part of that. And if you've ever reacted to feeling in wrestling, then that means that you are using Indes, the reaction to feeling. However, we don't see the term Indes and feeling appear in other areas of combat in the earlier sources, apart from this list in the Zettel gloss. Instead, it is only expressly stated with the bind and the swords. But this does start to change. For example, in Lekuchner's long knife, it's only a couple decades later than the popular sources and follows through the Zettel quite closely, but we see Indes expressly used in these other examples outside of the bind. As you feel that he grabs your right hand with his right, Indes grabs skillfully with your right one also. So we start seeing examples of wrestling actions based on feeling that are marked Indes, but we also get blade actions outside of the bind marked Indes. If he wants to strike from his right side to the knife, Indes avoid the stroke with the knife on his right side and thrust at him with the outstretched arm over his knife. As you fence more, you'll often be able to guess if the sword will be hard or soft in the bind, before they even touch. In this case, we knew they were going to be hard, so we changed through before the bind happened. And this is when Indes starts being translated to simultaneously, because it's guessing the reaction before the feeling occurs, and your movement becomes simultaneous with your opponent's movement. There are similarities, and the core concept of Indes is still the same, but it's possible that more is being added onto it. Or that list in the Zettel is confirming that Indes is encompassing, but only the sword binds ever get examples. And when we see Meyer's definition, he strongly believes it's the latter. Meyer is reading some of the same sources we have, perhaps more, perhaps less, but he is also part of the living tradition, only a couple generations removed. For example, Fabian von Auerswald was born before Talhofer's last book, and died after Joachim Meyer was born. The expression Indes has much meaning in that its origin is from the Latin word intus, and is taken into fencing as such, which is applied in the winding and similar work. However, this is not only the case. You must hear what follows. Here Meyer clearly admits that a common thought is that Indes refers only to feeling, and when the swords are bound, but fully believes that this is not the only time Indes is used. He says that one always and quickly take care, as in when you at first slash to the left, to then, at the same time, observe the opening to the right. Then thirdly, on to make sure that you attain the observed opening, where or with what actions you want to come onto it, that you don't then make openings for your opponent and take damage. From the initial read it sounds quite different, but is it? He talks about picking a right reaction, that way we're not giving them openings. Then he uses the word see or observe and bases our next action over what was observed. Observe sharply, which can be much observing and undertaking. Also seek to learn faking to your opponent sufficiently. You could interpret observing or noticing as using other senses as well to help out. They aren't exclusive. Then, in all these things to which the expression Indes has meaning, stands the whole art of fencing, as Liechtenauer said. And where you don't undertake such to carefully and securely drive all strikes, you will run into harm. So Meyer is still clear, just like the old sources, about the consequences of not using Indes and picking a proper reaction. So has Indes changed through the decades, or was it misunderstood and we just didn't get enough old sources? Thanks for watching, keep studying, keep practicing.